Are we on track for high-speed rail in Hampton Roads? Tonight we'll examine how and why our region is trying to hop on board this national project. This is What Matters. Good evening, I'm Cathy Lewis. There have been more people showing up for the recent high-speed rail public hearings than for many other transportation projects combined. A concerted effort to bring younger people to the high-speed rail platform paid off, with more than 1,000 residents appearing at 2 local hearings late last month. The urgency was the distribution of some high-speed rail funding from Washington, all part of an effort to spark the economy, create jobs, and build some future-focused infrastructure in the process. When the dollars were doled out, Hampton Roads didn't get quite as much as it was looking for, but our guests tonight say it's not too late for us all to climb aboard. Joining us, Virginia's newly appointed Director of the state's Department of Rail and Public Transportation, former 2nd District Congressional Representative Thelma Drake. Barry Bishop is with us tonight as well. He's the Executive Vice President of the Greater Norfolk Corporation and Secretary of Virginians For High-Speed Rail. And Brad Face is President of Face International Company, and he's also the co-chair of Virginians For High-Speed Rail. Thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. I'm going to tell you, we just ran that video of one of the hearings, the one at the Granby Theater. Well, the meeting getting ready for the hearing. It was stunning to see how many people actually turned out for that hearing.
I've heard 250 or some huge number.
But I mean, even at the hearings themselves, people really turned out.
Well, at the Norfolk hearing, there were 584 people who signed in and at least 1,000 who were present. It was standing room only, and I will tell you, every time we do a presentation on this project, that picture is included. And everyone is amazed to see how crowded the room was. Every seat was taken, and people were standing everywhere. Thank you. Thank you to Hampton Roads.
Well, it was an amazing
Passenger rail has really struck a responsive chord with the public. And, you know, I think we saw early indications, even over the past 4 years, whenever there was a transportation forum, rail would come up, passenger rail would come up. People talked about it. The public, I think, gets it. And I think having that number of people there has sent a very strong, crystal clear message that this is something that's a high priority for all of us.
And we should note as well that what came into that process of those hearings was the unanimous vote of the Transportation Planning Organization, Brad, to agree on the South Side route, which those of us who've been around for a while, as I know you have, and you have, and you have, that was kind of stunning.
I can't think of a precedent in regional history along those lines, because the folks on the peninsula deserve our respect and admiration, because it was a difficult thing politically to do.
To vote for a thing that wasn't going to be in any of their jurisdictions. Right, because they were getting a lot of pressure. Yeah.
Nobody can be expected to get down in the technical details of a project like this. But those who were looking at it objectively said, look, the South Side route is the route that technically works for high-speed rail for a number of reasons. And that message was conveyed to the civic leaders on the peninsula, and they talked with their elected leaders, and the elected leaders of the region talked together. And they did the right thing, even though it was politically difficult, which is a great statement. So I think all of us regionally must honor that and look for other ways that we can act like that as a region, because goodness knows I was the president of Future Hampton Roads for a number of years, and that was my annual message, that we're shooting ourselves in the feet continually, have been for a couple hundred years, because we don't act as a unit. And look what we can do when we can act like as a unit.
It's really amazing. Now, when the actual announcement was made, ironically on the day of the Norfolk hearing, the actual dollars were distributed, and a lot of it went to Florida. We were a little disappointed about that, but what did we wind up getting, and what does it mean?
Well, the money that we got from the stimulus funding was for a shovel-ready project that is up in the region of Quantico. And the reason that we got that funding, it's $75 million, it is for a just over 11-mile stretch of rail, for a third rail to go in, is that that's a bottleneck for Virginia to get people into the D.C. area, into Northern Virginia. So that was ready to go, and the whole focus was to create jobs. And there was $8 billion worth of funding available. There was over $100 billion in applications and $57 billion of acceptable applications. Wow. So we didn't get our funding, which would have been for the entire corridor, which was $1.8 billion, but the Federal Railroad has told us that our application was spectacular. So we expect, as time moves on, and I've had this conversation with them as well as with our congressional delegation, is you can't do a Northeast corridor and a Southeast corridor and not do Virginia. So as time moves on, we are very hopeful that this puts us even in a better position of connecting the dots, and that's Virginia.
And something that didn't get a lot of publicity, at least not that I saw, was that in the announcement of the award of the money down in Florida, the Vice President specifically mentioned the Virginia project as something that deserved attention. And he actually said, we all know how bad I-95 is. This is the Vice President of the United States talking about what we all live with in the state of Virginia. Right. So there is this recognition up there among the decision makers that our projects throughout the state deserve attention. And then we in Hampton Roads just happen to be the next adjoined market to what's already recognized as the Northeast-Southeast corridor.
And now that Hampton Roads is in the game, we really bring a lot to the table from the standpoint of we strengthen what was already a strong application, a part of the Commonwealth.
Well, you add 1.2 million people who would not have had access to this high-speed rail, and now that you can move them from Norfolk into Petersburg and Richmond and connecting with the Northeast corridor, look at the ridership, look at the demand, and one of the few locations in the country where heavy rail will join with light rail. Now, if we can do light rail into the ocean front, you would be able to get on that train in New York or D.C. or Boston and come all the way into Norfolk, get on the light rail, and spend a week with your children at the ocean front.
Wow.
What other beach can you do that at?
You know, it beats the heck out of July 3rd, 2009. That's, you know, really, I'm just saying.
Well, and any weekend in the summer, demand is so great for 95, 64 in the tunnel.
Trying to get through
it's
the
very
tunnel,
difficult.
There are a lot of folks that never make it to the...
So a great option to do a double great vacation, a train vacation and a beach vacation.
I like it. Yeah. You know, the other, I had a chance to be in Richmond last week and heard you make a presentation on these issues, and the thing I hadn't quite put together until I heard you talk about it was this idea of Hampton Roads being so critical in that it's not just that it's a great, it's not just that it would be great for the region. There really are some practical reasons in terms of bottlenecks and capacity that make this an option.
Well, you're taking vehicles off of 64, you're taking vehicles off the tunnel, but you're also adding ridership into the entire corridor. So Northern Virginia, everywhere, the people can get on in Norfolk and just keep going, which really supports the entire corridor because people aren't going to only go to Richmond.
Right.
They're going to continue going.
The potential for ridership to Washington is huge when you consider that we have the highest federal concentration of facilities outside of Washington.
And what did the statistics show about the numbers of people who are up and down that road and said they would love to have a rail option? The numbers of
Every
people.
one of them.
Probably. Yeah, no doubt.
We did a bit of a survey just within the business leadership organizations, and it was an overwhelmingly positive response we got from folks that said, we make a lot of trips and we'd love to have an alternative. We just don't have alternatives.
And a study's been done where the rail option, not counting the inconvenience factor that you avoid, is actually going to be cheaper for people to commute to Washington unless you got 3 people in the car. So if you're going by yourself or with somebody else, the rail's going to be cheaper than paying the mileage to the employees, not counting getting stuck in the tunnel or 64 or 95.
And what you're doing, Cathy, is you're expanding transportation choices. It's not just the car anymore, and you're increasing mobility for people. There are people who don't like the tunnel. They're very much afraid of the tunnel.
Who are they?
Not me. I do it all the time. But I've met people who are very much afraid of the tunnel. So you give them additional choices, and you increase mobility.
And so what is there's a, and this was what I didn't quite understand previously, but there's this issue with the overuse of the DC station and how Hampton Roads might be able to play a role
good point.
in relieving that?
It's kind of an alignment of the stars. In a lot of, I mean, without the Obama administration deciding this was going to happen, we wouldn't be sitting here. But there's a timing that Amtrak has a problem with their existing service, and that is they've got a whole lot of trains going into Union Station in Washington, and they don't have a place to park them, so that it clogs the station's throughput. It can't, the trains can't get through, so they wanted to move them down into Virginia. So if they have a choice of moving them into Virginia and putting people in the seats, not just, you know, garaging them somewhere, then that makes it better for Amtrak and for us. So there's this population of 10 to 15 trains in existence and a plan for 5 or 10 more trains that the folks south of us want to add to the system. So there's even going to be more overcrowding, more reason to move them down. We can split them between Newport News and Norfolk destinations and get that frequency and reliability that we don't have now, and you've got to have.
Service.
And one-seat service, which is
Washington,
something that we really need to work on, is one-seat service.
Overnighting in Norfolk, so that you take that train and put it in Norfolk, and then you start from Norfolk in the morning, so you're always on time.
Always starts on time, right? That's a beautiful
That's
thing.
one you can depend on.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you know, the alternatives right now are to get in a car and the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, then you've got 64, then you got 95, the uncertainty of when you're going to get there.
Sure.
If you say, well, gee, I can't do that, I better take the plane. Well, if you better take
have some
a
money.
serious
Yeah.
check with you, because last time I checked, the walk-up service is about $1,000 round trip.
Unbelievable.
So, as a matter of fact, the Hampton Roads Military and Federal Facilities Alliance did a bit of a study, and for every 100 travelers using high-speed rail, would save the federal government $22,500. For every 1,000, be $250,000, and for every 10,000, over $2 million. About a 43% savings when you consider the cost and the time, because time is money.
No question.
And you can be a lot more productive on a train using your computer, talking, and too many of us talk when we're in the car and shouldn't talk.
There is that.
So there are a lot of compelling reasons.
Yeah. You know, Thelma Drake, I was just, when I saw you in Richmond last week, it occurred to me, and I just want to check this perception. It seemed to me that you are really enjoying this job. I almost thought you might be enjoying this one best of all.
Well, I am really enjoying this position. It is a remarkable agency, and the whole change in people's thinking. You know, it used to be, and we've all watched it, that people simply wanted more roads built. Today, what you're hearing out of people is, give me other choices. Right. How can I get where I'm going? I know that you can't continue to build roads. We don't have the right-of-way. How are you going to do that? So there's a whole different mindset. Plus, it's a remarkable department, true experts in their field. And we do all of the rail in Virginia. We do all of the mass transit, public transportation. We do telecommuting in Virginia in the private sector. So any of your listeners, I want to make the offer to them that if that's something that would work in their business, we'd very much like to talk to them about that. We support them with funding to be able to buy the technology, as well as just some of the decisions. Will this work for you? Not work for you? How do you do it? Is it part of the day? Is it all of the day? Is it one day a week? Or is it every day? Because that's a huge issue for employers. We support 438,000 telecommuters.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
In the private sector. We don't do the public sector yet.
There you go.
It's done by another agency.
What does this mean to have, as someone who has a huge knowledge of this community, certainly, and understands how to talk with people in government?
It's been the subject of conversation in Hampton Roads.
Well, Brett and I were just talking about before the program.
Very positive. It is so great, because I'm something of a Virginia historian, at least amateur, and we've been the poor sister a lot of times throughout Virginia history. And we haven't been the focus of attention for rail for the last 15 years. We've got good friends in Richmond, to be sure. But to have Thelma in that position changes the whole equation, and that's one of the stars that has aligned for us in this moment of time, and I think has energized people, because the facts are on our side. We have the proximity to the Northeast Corridor. You know, when you look at rail, you don't want to go 1,000 miles, and you don't want to go 50 miles. You want to go about 3 hours.
300.
Something that's close enough that the plane isn't your best option, because it doesn't take too long. So everything about our circumstance at this time is just the right moment in time to really go after this. And it's good for the federal system, as Barry was saying. We have more to offer the federal system, my position, than any other market, because we can add, on both sides, 1.6 million people to the equation. The Peninsula service, I don't think, counts. I live in Smithfield, and I wouldn't really think of that was a way I could get to Washington on a dependable basis. So we improve both sides, and all of a sudden we're putting a lot of riders in those trains that are now going to have to come here anyway for their own purposes, so we get single train service rather than changing at Union Station.
You know, it occurs to me as well, as you look at the way this thing played itself out in this community, I don't recall, and maybe I'm just not thinking about this clearly, but I don't recall an issue around which so many people were actively and enthusiastically coalesced as this one, because it was a very short time frame. You were trying to get people inspired to do something about it, And man, did they get it done.
Yeah, no question about it. And there were a lot of younger folks there, and folks like Bobby Wright that really had such passion and enthusiasm and really energized.
Bobby Wright, the owner of the Granby Theater.
Exactly, did a super job on that. I think young people in particular really get it, but it has energized, I think, the community. And you know, to be sure, that $8 billion certainly got people's attention, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that in addition to that, I mean, the ball game is just beginning. There's $2.5 billion.
Because I think a lot of people feel like
$2.5 billion has already been appropriated for this fiscal year, if I'm not mistaken. There's promise of $1 billion a year for the next 4 years above and beyond that. And we're not even talking about the Surface Transportation Act, and there's the potential for a lot more money ultimately when that's passed. But
and we believe that, and I have had a conversation with Chairman Oberstar about the Surface Transportation Act, and I wanted him to know that one of his former committee members is serving in this role, and he was quite excited about that. Now, he doesn't think that bill will move this year. I was disappointed. I really think it will be next year now. I will be going up to see him, but you're right, Barry, that there is a tremendous focus in Washington on rail, on mass transit, and giving people transportation choices.
You know, what Thelma just said, though, Kathy, is so important. All kidding aside, and Brad and I were talking before the program that there's been more that's happened over the past 5 weeks since Thelma came on board. Granted, some other things, certainly the stars came into alignment, but the fact that Thelma can pick up the phone and call the chairman of the Transportation Committee, the fact that Thelma can pick up the phone and talk with the governor, talk with the House Speaker, is making not just a difference, making the difference. So we really are in a position to move forward, I think, as a Commonwealth and certainly from a Hampton Roads standpoint.
Yeah.
Well,
I recognize this is a federal play primarily, but as you look at your former colleagues in the House and across the Commonwealth, do you have the sense that they're engaged in the importance of this for Hampton Roads as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They understand how critical this is for Hampton Roads and what an incredible opportunity that we're facing right now. And Kathy, what we'll probably be doing is walking before we run. As you know, Norfolk Southern made a proposal at the public hearing in Norfolk that we could begin conventional rail out of Norfolk on their freight line. So we're working on that very diligently right now.
Conventional rail, which would mean the kind
79 miles an hour.
79 miles an hour. And when might that?
Well, if we can get some funding, and we're working on a few things, if we can make that happen, I would say in less than 3 years.
Wow.
And
That's
then we would
amazing.
still be on the track to be working on the federal side.
Right.
Because we have to go through all the federal steps now. We've simply had our Commonwealth Transportation Board vote last week to designate our route. So now we'll respond to all of the public comments within the document, not to the individuals, but within the document. And then all of that goes to Washington, and we're hoping by the end of December that we'll have what's called a record of decision. Then we move into a Tier 2 environmental impact study. And then you move through the various steps that the engineering and the design and all. So, I mean, what are we talking, 5, 6 years if we're lucky? And funding, you know, where do we get the funding? Now that, in the original document that was passed, it's 90 miles an hour. What we're talking about with Norfolk Southern is 79 miles an hour. And, you know, they can, what's interesting in Virginia is we put passenger rail on freight lines. So you've got to work with your railroads, and you've got to make all of that work together. So there's some opportunities for us.
The difference there is not going to be a big amount of time between 79 and 90. The problem we have in Virginia, which is being addressed with some of the funding we're getting, is not to go 0 miles an hour or 5 miles an hour.
Which is what we do.
Which is what we do. And if you've ever taken a train from Newport News, you go through Richmond, you just slow down. Before they did the work at Quantico, you'd stop there practically every time because it was
bottleneck.
You had one lane bridge.
Exactly.
So we're addressing the low end first. They're doing that also with some money that they got for D.C., getting across the Potomac, which is going to aid our case, although it didn't come to Virginia. It's being addressed up there with a little money, and they are working. They got some stimulus money to work getting the train bypassing the rail yard in Richmond, which wasn't in this pile of money, but will help us. So we actually got some other pieces, but the difference between 79 to 90 isn't going to be observed very much by the rider.
No, it's minutes.
We've got to get the low speed up.
Well, and then we'll show the ridership, we'll show the demand, and we'll be able to work incrementally. And I also want you to know, Kathy, that the Hampton Roads TPO has taken on the responsibility, Transportation Planning Organization has taken on the responsibility of working with us to be working on the stations, so that when we are prepared to move ahead, we've got the work behind us to do the station in Norfolk as well as the station in Bowers Hill, to work on the economic development aspects that would go along with the stations, because
Well,
permanent
that-
fixed rail,
yeah.
there are
Big
huge
opportunity,
opportunities for economic development. And then they will also work on a vision plan on getting higher speed rail into the region. So it's all kind of laid out, and we're all working together.
As you look at that Amtrak service on the peninsula, because we don't want to lose sight of the fact that there were some improvements that were advocated in that regard as well, one of the things I think, I want to make sure I've got this right, that you noted last week was we really need to take a look at the numbers of routes coming out of there, because
it's currently 2 round trips a day, but unfortunately CSX was told that we wanted 8 round trips a day, and they've been trying to fit that within their freight schedule, which has been a very, very difficult thing. We cleared that up when we all sat down together and talked, that right now the focus is how do we get these 2 running? What do we have to do to the schedule so that we get those 2 running on time and people can rely on what they're doing? Part of what was just passed brings on a 3rd train from Newport News. So that's the goal. I have met separately with CSX, I have met separately with Amtrak, and our next meeting will be everybody together. So I'm really looking forward to that, because then someone has to take it.
I like it.
The key really is frequent, reliable service.
Yes.
Sure, because
And
people
not
will take
going
it if it's
slow,
reliable.
As opposed to sometimes, and that's not to say that our ultimate goal isn't high-speed rail. It
Without a
is,
doubt,
and that's what the HRTPO is going to be working towards, and all of us are going to be working towards. But in the meantime, I think all of us would welcome an opportunity to get on a train and be able to get to to Washington in under 3 hours and know you're going to get there.
And one of the reasons to get up to that speed isn't the few minutes we'll save, but is to be in that single train that is high speed coming down the East Coast. And again, we don't want to be changing trains because that diminishes the value of the service so much. So we want to be able to accept the same service that's coming all the way from Boston to Petersburg without getting out of a train and into another one.
You know, it's interesting. I took about 40 civic leaders to Richmond last week, and we took the train. We rode the train from Newport News to Richmond. And fortunately, you know, the morning train's usually pretty much on time, and it probably ought to be considering where it's located. That's, you know, if it's right there and then it's not on time, that's a problem. But to your point, we rode the bus back because we could not. We could not be encouraged about the. Yeah, it's just not reliable enough to be able to get everybody back in time.
Or it may not have fit your schedule.
Exactly.
For what time you're coming back. So if you have
you can nail that down.
Right, to have the service so that people can make it fit into their schedules, they're not going to do it if it isn't easier.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, the business folks and all of the contractors, the folks that are associated that do business with the government, and again, the fact that we have the largest concentration of federal installation outside of Washington, if folks can get on a train early in the morning and know that they can get up there to do business by 9, 10 o'clock in the morning and can come back at a reasonable hour, say I'm making this up as I go along, but 5 or 6, there's a tremendous potential demand for service there.
I think you would also see some very interesting changes in living patterns too, because in that scenario, you really would have a situation where people could reasonably work jobs in D.C.
How about companies themselves?
You know what I mean? Yeah, and companies themselves, right.
Right.
I mean, it's such a good point. You could reasonably do that in that kind of a scenario. It's just not possible now.
No.
It's not possible at all.
And there's something to be, I mean, when you look into the vision of this, improving the corridor on 460, the rail corridor, also allows a VRE type thing to happen, so adding to this different trains, because you don't want to stop the fast trains. But goodness knows we as a society have looked what it's like to grow a society around interstates, not intended to be commuting, but intended to be interstates when they were designed. Well, imagine designing south sides, the old south side, the south side of the James River, around, polynucleated is the word they use, around train stations. Isn't that
you could only use
word?
that word on this show, but I'm very impressed that you pulled it off.
A planner told me that, and I wrote it down and pronounced it many times.
Well done.
But it's basically like a Long Island Railroad.
Yeah.
You build stations, and you have people who can walk to the station or very easily get to it.
Well, I want to thank all of you for your efforts, and congratulations on your appointment. And we'll continue to keep track of this, and we'll come back and revisit it in a couple of months. I'll be back in a moment with a final thought. A few weeks back in this space, I took my hat off to Hampton Mayor Molly Ward for being the very public face of the unanimous decision about where to put high-speed rail. Mayor Ward modeled eloquently the concept that sometimes a project can benefit a city even when it's not located within its city limits. The Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, which Mayor Ward co-chairs, unanimously determined new high-speed rail service should come up the south side, roughly along 460 between Petersburg and Norfolk, while adding improvements to Peninsula's Amtrak service. Well, tonight I want to take my hat off to the nearly 2,000 people who got up out of their easy chairs, climbed back in their cars, and headed out to those public hearings late last month. You heard tonight that the numbers did exactly what they were intended to do. They sent a powerful message about Hampton Roads' interest in high-speed rail. A particular pat on the back belongs to downtown developer Bobby Wright, who is a creative and sometimes impatient young man whose dreams for the city are as bold as his energy. Bobby Wright turned his beautifully restored Granby Theater into ground zero for high-speed rail, creating a welcoming space for 20, 30, and 40-somethings, putting their first toe into public life. And when they heard the message, they turned out. And despite the not as much as we wanted in terms of dollars, it looks like they're still fired up to do everything they can to be waiting on that platform when the high-speed rail trains roll into the station. Well, there are lots of ways that you can be at our station. Be in touch with us about what matters to you. Email us at whatmatters@whro.org. You can visit us whatmatters.tv. We also have a website where you can, if y'all need to be in touch with us, I don't know what else I can do for you. We've got a weekly newsletter. We'll be glad to let you know what we're working on as soon as we figure it out as well. Like so many others, you can find us on Facebook as well. And if you can't wait for more local talk till next Friday night, I do hope you'll join us on the radio for Hearsay. That's 89.5 WHRV at noon. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week for another look at what matters.